Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh, we're not here for this. We're here for the Apprentice version. Oh. Oh boy, here we go. This is Warbonds! No, not these Warbonds. This is a Warbond game. Warbonds. Battle for Vitoria Apprentice version. This is an epic fantasy strategy game where you control a warlord that is vying for supreme control of the land by killing off the other warlords. To help you in your quests, you'll hire all sorts of troops as your bidding, trigger special abilities, and upgrade your base called a war camp. And no randomness. That's right, you heard it here. Even though there's dice to keep track of health, everything is entirely deterministic. So there's tons of options every turn with this player booklet that serves as a big catalog to see what types of units you want to spawn and details of all their nuanced abilities. Yep, this is a big game, a big system, but this is the Apprentice version. So if you want to go even harder, we'll have a Master Set version review coming soon. If it's already here, it's going to be in that corner over there. Still here? Okay, let's get into this. Quick how to play. Goal of the game is to kill your enemies, that is, eliminate each of them by killing their warlord or base called a war camp. So yes, each player is a warlord roaming around the land of Vitoria fighting to the death. You pick a warlord and they have different stats like health, their attacking stats, and special abilities. You know what else has all that stuff? The troops you can spawn. So Warbonds isn't just your warlord running around, it's them also recruiting other dudes to help them fight, called squads. These squads are also filled with very similar stuff to the warlords, just weaker. Like their army size, which is like health, attacking stats, and their abilities are a little less. Each unit that is a warlord or squad will have an initiative, which basically shows how fast they go. Every round, every unit will get to have one turn, as we go from left to right on this initiative table. So here we'll start with this fast warlord, who will first take their turn, which is them moving according to their movement stat. Then performing a single action, like attacking, deploying another unit, or using a special ability. Say they're done, and now we go to the next piece, which is a squad. These guys are archers, so they have a ranged attack of 2 spaces away. You're not attacking a flying thing, so you're not getting an additional attack. Wait, what, an additional attack? What does that mean? Well, funny thing about Warbond's attack system is that when you do an attack action, each attack actually only does 1 damage, but you have multiple attacks per turn, aka you swing multiple times. So how do you enlarge in your army? Well, if any unit is ever next to one of these special areas on the board called wild spaces, they can take an action to spawn a squad. That is, picking one of the many different types of units and plopping its piece down. So what can you spawn on your turn, you ask? Well, basically anything in this booklet, as long as it doesn't violate player alignments. Good warlord players can only spawn good or neutral units, and the evil warlord players can only hang out with evil or neutral. Squads have a token that's real important called loyalty. Being loyal is important so they don't suddenly leave you one day for another boyfriend even though they said they liked you. Warlord. Loyalty is especially useful in duels, which we'll cover in a bit. Chaos units gain loyalty by seeing their warlord attacking while they watch from close by, whereas law units get loyalty from attacking things while their warlord watches. These things are warlords' leadership tokens, which they gain in their own ways, and can use to pay for their special abilities. Eventually, every single non-disabled unit gets a turn, as this tracker moves all the way to the right. And then we'll have each player's war camp go, where they usually use it to spawn units. Then you do some stuff to wrap up the turn a bit, like choosing to concede. Wait, what? Choosing to concede. End of turn stuff also includes moving the dragon to the right, where a special end of round thing happens. Like here, everyone just gets loyalty. Or here, your warlord can persuade, aka convert an enemy squad to your side. That's why loyalty is good. Oh, and we didn't mention how to level up your war camp yet. That's also a win condition. So your war camp starts at level 1, and when you get it to level 3, you win the game. So to do that, you want to get growth tokens, which you get 3 of by eliminating other players from the game. 3 tokens equals your war camp leveling up once. The other main way to get this is to bid leadership tokens at the end of certain turns when the Influence the Public event comes up, Whoever bids and spends the most leadership from their warlord there gets 2 growth tokens. One last thing, dueling, where if your warlord is right next to another warlord, it's an action to challenge the other to a duel. Then the rest of the game freezes, and you use this dueling sheet, where warlords just play out rounds of attacking each other once. And squads nearby the duel on the map can spend 1 loyalty to literally run into the duel and do an attack of their own, or block an attack. Anyways, for this dueling, it keeps going until one player chooses to surrender that fight, probably saving their life, but making all their nearby chaos and law squads usually lose loyalty. That's the bare bones of the game. Just keep moving this initiative tracker right until every single unit gets a turn, then you do end of turn stuff, and then rinse and repeat until there's only 1 warlord survivor left, or someone has a fully upgraded war camp. Yep, there's much more things, but we'll get into that as we get into this review. Pros time of Warbonds, and right off the bat there are 5 different warlords you can play as, which are all incredibly distinct and lead to you playing different strategies. To start off simple, you can play as Tengus Unchained, who is a big bruiser orc that rewards you for attacking an opponent's war camp. This guy loves to build up a beefy army and eventually launch a massive assault into their opponent's camp, getting leadership by challenging enemy warlords to a duel on the way. Then Tengus can use that leadership to slightly heal himself and get even more damage in a single turn. Or you can play as Anna Zandra Soul Judiciary, not really sure how to say that, but she's big on the anti-undead play. Yes, there are zombies in this game. Essentially, she's really good at fighting undead units, getting more damage against them, gets leadership whenever one dies around her, and no undead can even spawn around her. She's really good to put yourself in the thick of fights, balancing survival with all the bonuses she gets from things dying around her. Or you could play as the mage, Scarred Rufus the Red, who can perform a tattoo ritual, letting each of his surrounding units sacrifice a bit of health for him to get leadership. But wait, it's not always them taking damage, because this is death damage, meaning that if you do this for certain undead units, that won't affect them. Having so much leadership is useful on Rufus, since each leadership increases his max health by 4 in a duel. Now we have over 16 more max health. The other 2 are a homeless dude who is good at spending his whole turn to meditate to get his unit's loyalty, or this chariot riding musician who likes to scream to make everything else lose loyalty. You can really pick a personality and playstyle for each game, and this affects your unit spawns. Maybe you want to just ignore the evil units by being a good guy. Maybe you want to play defensive and keep meditating to gain loyalty and leadership with the vagabond. Alright, but now let's get into what makes Warbonds this player booklet. This booklet of things you can deploy on the map. This is by far the most unique part of this game, where there are 18 units to choose from this menu every time you deploy. Okay, obviously you can't spawn all the units, some will be a different alignment than your warlord, but that's fine to choose from like 12 because each unit is like a freaking mini warlord in terms of depth. We got the Phalanx, who is humanoid and armored with above average squad size at 11. He moves slow at initiative 8, but has 2 types of attacks, a spear that does well against mounted units, and a javelin that also does well against mounted, but has a range of 2. What's the big specialty here? Well, if you stack a bunch of Phalanx next to each other, they get the formation bonus, letting each Phalanx unit get an extra swing when attacking. Or how about boulder hurlers who like to throw rocks as a ranged attacks, but can also toss allies, getting them both loyalty. Not sure how this makes them more loyal, but whatever. Really fun to reposition one unit and buff both units. Those are fairly simple ones. Like, let's look at these little anarchists, surname Krusty, which are super anti-war camp. If they're near an enemy war camp, these crusty units can just decide what that war camp does on its turn. You can make the war camp attack an ally. Yes, war camps can attack, and yes, you can attack any unit in this game. Or maybe like more zombies, we got the Living Dead. He can use his full turn to sacrifice half of himself, spawning those units that were sacrificed into an adjacent space. And yep, that's an entirely new squad with its own initiative. To help him heal back up, he gets to regain a squad member every time he takes undead damage, and since he's undead, undead damage doesn't hurt him anyways. So have your other undead unit, bleeding horrors like my butthole after spicy food, do their maul for death damage. Mini heal, woohoo! Actually, yes, this is a perfect time to explain that every unit, including your warlord, has elemental weaknesses, resistances, and immunities. Wow, that's a lot of interactions, as most units have at least one thing they're influenced by a bit differently. When we also factor in that units have the attributes of good or evil, or lawful or chaotic, or all the other attributes here, there is so much nuance behind spawning each unit. Because units are so nuanced, Warbonds is filled with so many little cool combos you can do. Here's a quick one. Remember Scarred Rufus the Red, who can let allies do undead damage to themselves? You can have the masochistic Painbringers, who want to take damage, do a little bit to themselves. 1 damage is nothing, letting them use their Pain Seeker to gain 1 loyalty. Pain is good. We're not going to go into all the combos and interactions, but just know that there are healers, flying disruptive crows, yes, being airborne is a thing, archers that can deal any element when attacking, and even spirits that can become any other unit. Warbonds Apprentice has a nice rock, paper, scissors dynamic with soft unit counters, but that's just the beginning of the puzzle because you still want to figure out what units play off your own warlord or other units well. Like, certain undead units are just good to have their abilities used on one another. Or maybe you just want to have a bunch of phalanxes next to each other to build an impassable wall that gives each phalanx attacking bonuses. You have info on everything in this game, so it's up to you to get creative with this player booklet and where and when to spawn each unit. With that being said, positioning is really well handled and nuanced. See, you're going to play with terrain in Vitoria, and these roads right here are really cool because they give you one free movement. One free movement is a lot in this game because you can combine it with full turn abilities to move and then also do a really strong action. Me use free move onto road, and then I can chuck rock with boulder hurlers, really strong attack. Or I could prioritize securing this wild terrain, which is the only place you can spawn more units outside of using your war camp's turn. To position, there's 4 different types of movement to do. So there's normal, mountain, aquatic, and flying. Not only is this another thing to look out for when spawning units, but it makes you play around terrain carefully, like aquatic units move painfully slow, whereas flying units can just fly over any terrain, and even enemy units. You'll want to space very well to abuse attacks range as much as possible. Remember, law units get loyalty when attacking next to your warlord, or whenever your warlord attacks at all, chaos units around him all get loyalty. That's a lot of loyalty. Oh, and then we haven't talked much about the war camp yet, which is a cool hub that can restore nearby squad's ammo or health to full, or heal your warlord. But yeah, defend that, because if it dies, you lose the game. But we have to go back to you, the warlords, them dueling each other. That is, the duel mechanic in Warbonds. This does a really good job of forcing interesting game states as you have to manage loyalty on nearby units to your warlords carefully, and it just overall feels like it completes the no-randomness aspect of Warbonds. We say that dueling completes the game because not only does it give another outlet to attack other warlords, but it also really rewards stacking loyalty on units and spacing them close to your warlord. There can even be a bit of a chicken game going on in multiplayer, as 2 isolated players eye each other on how much each is willing to spend for loyalty or leadership to protect their warlord from damage. Dueling is a cool alternative to normally attacking because every single warlord has some way to manipulate duels, which is pretty clever to figure out and play around. And if dueling completes the warlord squad dynamic, well, then the end of round dynamic really completes the overall pacing of the game. See, after every single turn, once we move this all the way to the end, that's every single squad going and war camp going, then we're gonna move this dragon up 1 space, triggering all sorts of different things. Some rounds feel like setup rounds with war speeches to give everyone loyalty on their units, or persuasion to punish some players for having 0 loyalty on some units. The big one that really breaks up the game is the influence the public, where the winners get steps in leveling up their war camp, but the winner also gets to have every law unit on the map gain a loyalty, and every chaos unit lose 1, or vice versa. Wow, what a crazy swing that can have some big consequences in multiplayer games when the game is stacked. Influence the public is every 3 rounds, and if you're playing a long con strategy, you're always playing around that. Our last gameplay pro is how Warbonds handles its no randomness element well because of the mass amount of decision making with all the unit depth, and also how there's just more elements coming in the game with the entry of new squads. In multiplayer, the fact that some units, like this domestic corvus, can move 7 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, means a lot. And then some units have area of effect abilities, so when you're using that to target multiple players on the board, that can really change game states. Warbonds does not feel solved at all because of what new combos players can theorycraft in combining units or doing a backdoor attack with a flying unit. It's like pulling all these training card abilities out of your butt, these nuanced units. But then everyone has access to this butt and then knew about it this whole time with this player booklet of squads. And if you couldn't tell already, this game has great replayability, mostly from how many different strategies you can employ as you deploy different troops from the 18 types with 5 different warlords. Like, the amount of openings this game has unlimited, as you get to choose where to put your war camp after your first couple games. There's pre-built maps for beginners, but this game encourages to eventually build your own, so sky's the limit. Speaking of some of the different terrain, Warbonds really has the high fantasy bells and whistles here, with the theme meeting the gameplay. There's a classic evil versus good alignments with units that actually does matter, and you can feel like you're playing for the Horde with Django Unchained running in. Or For the Lions is real with this homeless monk dude. There's a story as your horde or alliance gets bigger and interacts with everything else in the game, including each other. Because abilities are so specific with really fleshed out units, there's good room for your imagination to soar. Like, imagine 11 boulder hurlers going like Mego Rock Throw and picking up 8 Domesticate Corvus Crows to hurl them across the board 2 spaces. Or how about fully upgrading your war camp and then turning it into a caravan and then charging it into battle? Yes, charging it into battle to attack 2 different units. 5 damage. There's undead healing, elemental resistances, and warlords inspiring your troops to later possibly give their life as a body shield for the warlord, like a freaking sidekick to a main hero. That's all here. Your force will end up being some hilarious ragtag MTG Narnia World of Warcraft fighting force, as your warlord makes a war band, and you can use it to roam across the land and destroy everything in its path. Okay, so now we get to the cons of Warbonds Apprentice. So you might imagine that a game like this, with so many different nuances from roads on the map, warlord specialties and attributes, unit specialties and attributes, and then dueling as a thing, and then all these different initiatives, and then you got war camps. This is going to be a little hard to start, right? And yep, you're totally correct on that. But the current rulebook with this alpha version here is often quite confusing. If you're reading it from front to back, it feels really out of order, where it really should be explaining warlords and squads as one of the first things after initial setup, instead of going into the nitty-gritty about initiative order. It's like, why should I care about how rounds and initiative work if I don't even understand what I'm doing with each unit? You're not going to understand why leveling up your war camp is useful in this war camp section without even seeing what the war camps do. It was also confusing what the heck I should be doing with each piece when it's time for its turn. This is all explained clearly through the player aids. That is, you're usually just doing a movement and a standard action. But you have to hunt for this info through the rulebook, going from unit movement to abilities to attacking. A player aid is not a replacement for saying the order clearly in the rulebook. Oh, and these player aids need to be way bigger, and we generally don't like double-sided flippy cards unless you can specifically turn them for parts of the gameplay, which isn't the case here. A mechanic that was insanely confusing to learn was the all-important deploying units, where there really needs to be examples and visuals of the actual deploy being done on a turn. Like, I remember when we first played, we were super confused about deploying because we thought if a unit was disabled, it immediately goes to the recall mechanic, which would mean a unit has to recall immediately after you deployed it, which wouldn't make any sense. The grief of not having any examples. There's more stuff, like all this right here. We're not going to include that all in this review because that would be so time consuming, but yeah, that's a lot. Luckily, there is a how to play on the Warbonds website, which practically feels like mandatory watching with the current rulebook. And also, if this is an apprentice version of Warbonds, where's the quick start guide? Where? But now it's time for practically the second rulebook to talk about. The player guide. Booklet. And so this is one of the most comprehensive player accessories we've seen, with a proper intro, win condition, end of round event explanation, symbol explanation area, and even a table for all the units. These are all fine things. The problem is when you combine that with more pages of units so that you're constantly flipping around mid-game. Units are the most important thing, but need to find terrain, flip backwards. Need to look at your enemy warlord's ability, flip forward. End of round stuff, flip backward. And then you're going back to squads. Man, this is a lot of flipping. To take out the flipping, this player aid should have been split into 3 parts. One booklet for all the units, including warlords, one sheet for all the symbols and player aid stuff, and then the last sheet is for the terrain and war camp nuance. Now we have to get to the components, and yes, this is an alpha version of Warbonds Apprentice, but man, is this game really hard to visually keep track of at all times. Like sure, a lot of the game, especially early on, will be looking at your buying guide in the player aid, which is fine. But everything board or initiative table related is so rough. The text on every single unit is ridiculously tiny. Like, there's no way you're going to be able to see what each unit is from far away. And the game already has so much art on every unit. Why not make that art clear on every piece? Okay, you're going to have to make the game board bigger too, especially if this game is allowing for multiplayer. While surnames like Simple or Rockhead are entertaining to see, they're just not readable. Take out all these tiny symbols and get the basics right of seeing what units are. Art, surname, and then probably movement. Oh, and flying units are probably just inherently going to be a little janky with stands because they share spaces with ground units. But then that's just kind of what that is. I can't think of a way to solve this problem. Let me know in the comments if you can think of a solution. The unit cards aren't much better. Yeah, these are pretty normal sized cards with not normal sized information. Like if the cards were bigger, you just wouldn't have to rely on the player booklet as much, making for easier play. Plus, you see these medicine bottle looking items, good or evil, lawful or chaotic. These need to be color coded or have a symbol, since they are very important for most parts of the game. Wait, but then the pieces have color coding for tiny text, law versus chaos, which comes out of nowhere because those colors aren't on the cards. Plus, blue text for evil unit that is lawful is kinda confusing, symbols required here. While we're on alignments, neutrality as a term is really weird because there's neutral for good and evil, and neutral with regards to lawful and chaotic. Maybe make lawful and chaotic have its own impartial term instead. In our games using it as rules written, it was pretty much mandatory to have an announcer, someone to get really close to the pieces and keep announcing whose turn it is, because you can't read that from far away. You really can't. Okay, so we're on to gameplay cons finally. So let's talk about the balance of this Warlord, Scarred Rufus. This guy has a really odd last ability to give him more maximum health in duels. This is worded where that maximum health only applies during a duel, meaning that if he takes a ton of damage in duels, he is still alive and can probably outlast his opponent. This feels pretty underpowered in most cases, since it only gives you a benefit if you're dueling the last player in the game. For this to be way more flexible, we would have added a line that if he ends a duel and would die, he can spend multiple leadership to remain at 1 health. Then let's get into the unit design, and this makes more sense once you've played the game that Warbonds Apprentice is based off of, Warbonds Master Set. Doesn't say Apprentice. Warbonds Apprentice lifted 18 units from the Master Set, while also taking out some mechanics for those units. Let's start with gold. So Apprentice doesn't have any gold costs, meaning that spawning units and upkeeping them every turn is completely free. Well, okay, if units are free and you can't really get any quick victories because your war camps are so far away from each other, and the units make up your army, well, you're gonna spawn as many units as you can early game, right? The beginning of games can look like a bunch of unit spawn, until you hit around 6 and then the game starts ramping up a bit. Think about killing an opponent's units, then only for them to respawn it pretty shortly thereafter for no cost, no matter how strong the unit was. This especially hurts the 1v1, where attacking your only enemy's units just gets easily replaced. The way to solve this and still keep units free is to have a maximum amount of unit spawn per game. Like say you can only spawn 10 squads ever in a game. Some niche units also can kind of feel like risky dead ends, like the domesticated Corvus, that is a blazing fast disruptive unit that had anti-supply abilities, making them good to prevent others from activating some abilities, but these crows don't attack well. In Warbonds Master, you could upgrade this into something else once you got your utility out of it, but in the Apprentice version, no upgrade exists. Not saying that you wouldn't ever spawn this Corvus now, but it's just not that flexible to use and can be a bit unforgiving if it ends up taking the wrong slot in your army cap of 6. Speaking of units, let's talk about some extra cons with the handling of units. It is very fiddly. Every time you spawn a new unit after picking it out of this booklet, you need to first find the pieces in this included Plano box. Okay, got it. Now you have to find the included matching surname in this deck of cards. Then you need to put the 2 pieces on their corresponding boards. Then you need to find ammunition for said unit. Not only that, once a unit dies, you need to return this back to this stack of cards and put it probably back alphabetically. We've covered that they're hard to see already, which makes this process worse. Like, thank goodness this game came with the Plano, but besides just making everything easier to see, having a divider for the cards would speed that up a bit. Or maybe take something out of people's DIY solution for Food Chain Magnate's cards. And remember, this is not the Master version that has 2 Planos that come with it. So yeah, the fiddliness is not as bad as Master Set. And for a game with so many different types of pieces and units and tokens and cards, the fiddliness is just kind of unavoidable. The final con is how this game is quite analysis paralysis prone and definitely does not run true to time for the multiple intro sessions you play. This is definitely the nature of the game with so many decisions on every turn. Let me read that unit's 4 abilities. This time length also runs hand in hand with there being player elimination. So if you got killed off, you're just out and the other people could keep playing for easily an hour or 2 after you. The game does slightly speed up once someone dies, as now the killer's war camp levels up to do more things. But yeah, you have been warned of just sitting there doing nothing after being knocked out early. To help the game run faster, the player booklet gives a recommended starting build for each warlord, but man, that only covers 6 units, which won't get you through the 4th or maybe even 3rd round. So then you have to make a ton of decisions for yourself. Why not put more recommended units or a player tip here? Plus, since Warbonds has no randomness and is very high conflict, if you play the wrong unit at the wrong moment, you might be kinda screwed. So even if you're told to spawn a certain unit, you'll sometimes just go against that grain to find something that fits your current board state, and man, that can take a while. Like, once you get this game down, memorize openings, and speed up setup, then we could easily see 1v1 games taking an hour, or 4-player games taking 3 hours. But again, you need to know what you're doing. So to get there, you might have to play either a lot of games, or between your first and second game, take this booklet home and just study up on it. Study up the units. This is what my friends did for the master set, and look what all they wrote down here. Oh my god. Oh, and then 2-player especially has the board be way too big. There should have been more of a way to block out parts of the board for lower player counts. The 2-player works, but what we wouldn't recommend is 3 to 5 players, more so the 3 players with less politics. Because Warbonds is really victim to the Mexican standoff of 2 players attacking each other, while the other guy sits in the corner unscathed. A smaller map 1v1 or 4 players is the way to go here. Okay, enough with the cons, nitpick time, and remember, this is an alpha version. Some tiles are slightly coming apart, which isn't great, or how the back of game boards is just sheer white. Just plain white. Let's talk about player count though, where the 2-player can be a bit wonky for newcomers, since some warlords will just straight up counter each other with their recommended units. And by newcomers, we mean that people who are playing their first couple of games with how many units you can choose from here. The last couple nitpicks I would categorize under thematic, but unfortunately fiddly as all heck. So squads, the units that aren't your warlords, are meant to have a squad size because it's a bunch of dudes. So a phalanx would be 11 dudes in a single unit. The game really plays off of this multiple bodies idea, where you have to send squads back to probably a war camp to replenish their numbers. This adds some nuance to squads because they can be kind of low in number, but not easily one shot because each attack can only kill one squad member at a time. But maybe a distinction in the game between healing units and then resupplying them for squads should have been more distinct. Or another annoying thing for squads is that whenever they take damage, they do one less attack whenever they attack. Man, that is easy to forget. And that number doesn't ever get reduced even if they're only at 1 squad member left. I guess this makes sense to not make the game too fiddly while having some type of theme, but then just remove this mechanic entirely, and then you wouldn't really hurt the game much. Okay, last one I promise on thematic but fiddly. Small attribute units can move through enemy occupied spaces. Man, that is easy to forget, and does piggyback off how the game is visually messy already. Oh, and then there's another unthematic thing where ranged attacks into sky do +1 attack. Gosh, this game just has a lot of things to keep track of, and it's just visually messy, but whatever. That's it for nitpicks. Scoring time. Now it's time for a tentative score on Warbonds Apprentice, because this is still in alpha right now. So much more to come from this, and we'll have the master set review dropping in a couple days. For now, as we critically evaluate the aforementioned pros and cons, as well as determining whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place, Warbonds Apprentice is going to get a 4 out of 10. It is below average. Warbonds is actually a pretty cool idea, and an ambitious one at that. It's kind of like a bunch of games in one. Super positional, no randomness, chess play with a grid map and different units. But units that are so different and thematic that they can feel out of like a trading card game. Like, stacking loyalty and leadership definitely feels akin to counters in cards of Magic the Gathering. But then the game kind of feels like a fantasy militaristic spin on Sid Meier's Civilization with a base to protect and an army to optimize. Oh, but then units have differing attacks, area of effect spells, elemental vulnerabilities, and flying versus non-flying traits. This game is kind of like a tactical RPG like Final Fantasy Tactics, without the randomness. Wow, this is a lot of ideas, but does it make for a good board game? Huh. Well, Warbonds is just going to be a visually dense system with all the abilities, and it currently isn't doing any favors in clarity. But ironically, we would say that the biggest hurdle to Warbonds Apprentice, the supposed beginner version of Warbonds, is still getting people to play it. See, not only is the rulebook rough, but the dedication to play is still going to be pretty out of reach for most board gamers. The gameplay outside of the free unit spawn works, but most of the nuance rides on knowing the 18 complex units well. I mean, sure, you could just strictly buy the recommended units here in the player guide, but that only gets you through 6 spawns. So after that, you're on your own. And you still need to read what you spawned and see how it interacts with opponents' units. Not simple. Like, Think about how every attack in this game is not a common attack. It has some type of attribute add-on to it. Imagine learning Magic the Gathering that has a bunch of different units. But those don't always have abilities, and when they do, they're almost never as complex as any unit in Warbonds. Plus, you don't have to choose between a bunch to play, you have a hand of cards. Warbonds never feels like the systems are playing you, as you choose to play from a swath of squads, politic when necessary, and carefully sync up each unit's abilities and initiatives. A game like this is a hobby in of itself, an adventure that rewards playgroups, 4 players ideally. Admittedly, all the unit complexity and interactions would definitely be handled better through digital, where you can learn at your own pace and not have to worry about tiny text or pieces. But there is certainly a multiplayer politic magic across the table, and not all turns are fiddly. Sometimes you just move a piece a couple of spaces. We're basically saying that Warbonds is a good, bold, if not slightly flawed idea for a table. It currently requires a lot for you to get the Apprentice game going and to keep track of gameplay. Warbonds Apprentice actually would have been a 5 out of 10 if Warbonds Master Set didn't exist, which has a more concrete handling of units, which really removes Warbonds Apprentice unique draw. See, if you're the type that thinks that they would like this type of system, maybe you should just go harder and go for this Master Set. That has over 60 units, about 4 times as many units as Apprentice, with gold, terrain, neutral settlements, elite units. It is really more complicated than Apprentice. So maybe just bite the bullet and buy the Master Set to save money? But at the same time, Warbonds Master is crazy in its complexity, and it's definitely longer. So maybe you just get the Apprentice version once they work out all the jank and learning stuff? Maybe a game like this is cool for you to learn the units and think about, but wouldn't ever hit the table, so then you just wait for digital to come out, Warbonds Digital, fingers crossed for that. If you like high fantasy medieval feeling gameplay, handling complex units that you can choose from at any time with zero randomness, and don't mind a steep learn, then Warbonds Apprentice might be something you keep your eyes on, and start theory crafting unit interactions now. And if this doesn't seem like enough craziness for you for some reason, the Master Set might be for you. My personal score for Warbonds Apprentice is going to be a 6 out of 10, above average. I was pretty quickly impressed with Warbonds. The Warlords are really cool, and I want to play all of them. The units are actually complex and have character. And you have a war camp that you can upgrade, and you feel like you're charging around land as a warlord. This really spoke to me as something I could really sink my teeth into. It's not very often that I meet a game that floors me so hard with how the units are integrated into the theme. And when I put units on the map, units felt real in front of me. And you get to use every unit multiple times a game, you get to connect with each unit's possibilities. Like dang, it's a trading card multiplayer game where the units are moving around a board. Oh, and the turn system is also really engaging because there's not really turns, rather initiative of units, making every round feel exciting with practically no downtime. I'm either thinking of abusing my warlord ability, figuring out how to position my armies for loyalty generation, looking at what to buy to possibly pivot my strategy, or convincing people not to attack me as per usual. Dude, why is Wade always attacking me in this game? I swear. There's so many cool openings I can imagine, so many cool strategies to try, and I've already seen hilarious game states in multiplayer where it felt like the interaction was incredibly strong with everyone moving their units in their own way. And it's really well paced. The action happens right away as I look at what my opponents are spawning, and then there's really good pacing with the end of round dynamic as you have to play around those. This all adds up to a game with a lot of uncertainty on what players are ever going to do. And I normally say I like a little bit of randomness, healthy randomness in my games, but I'm not really missing it too much here because the system is so tight. In many ways, playing this game is freaking awesome. But then there's some other part of it where it feels like the idea of playing Warbonds is actually more fun than actually playing it. So the unit interactions are cool, especially when you can trigger combos, but when stretched across multiple opponents, that's a lot of bandwidth to keep track of. The game kind of feels like gacha sometimes. Like sometimes someone forgot someone else's interaction and ended up giving them a key unit advantage. But Warbonds doesn't feel that bad in this regard because the game has so much possible adaptation that you feel like you can think your way out of so many binds. And I just love the theme, so the gachas don't feel that bad. But the fiddliness, oh my gosh, yeah. The components and visuals do not work well for me in this board game. I feel like at least an hour is wasted hunting for the right pieces, organizing the cards alphabetically, or the one that's all too common, seeing whose turn it is. It felt mandatory to play with a pen and paper in hand at some point, to not only write down unit buys, but also literally point to what the heck was going on. And that doesn't even include setup and takedown, which don't feel good with these pieces. But if Warbonds was a video game, I would probably not play it. and I got so many other video games to play that especially can account for randomness well. Like the table feels alive as everyone is pointing fingers, and I feel the weight of armies running across the land of Vitoria. That's the thing about Warbonds. The more I played, the more I felt the theme come alive and the stories got better. When I first played, the game was very 4 out of 10 for me, but then I memorized unit initiatives, weaknesses, key abilities, and warlord weaknesses, and then the game really came alive. But you know, that took a while, especially in fighting the rules. But hey, once I was over the hurdle, the game was pretty cool once you trudge through the component stuff. The perfect balance for me would be this Apprentice version, just heavily streamlined and visually cleaned up, and then had some way to add gold in for units, and this game would be a 7 out of 10, maybe an 8 out of 10 for me. Yeah, it has that potential, but it needs a lot of trimming around the corners to get there. Like, here, I have all these ideas right here that I've written down. Yeah, all these could definitely be changed, but am I excited when they come up with the new Apprentice version of Warbonds? And now I'm onwards to the Master Set version. This guy right here. And this isn't even all the pieces, and it barely fits in the box. Oh boy. Thanks for watching this video of Warbonds Apprentice, being sent this did not affect scoring. And as always, thank you to our patrons. We got all you guys right here. Patrons going. Patrons going. Warbonds. Warbonds. Plano box. Comes with a Plano. Okay, now all those are done. Now we got our Mad Lands of Cardboard. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, and remember to like and subscribe. Let me know what you think of this game or anything similar to it. Heard Cloudspire is a little similar, or maybe you have some comparisons to Final Fantasy Tactics, Fire Emblem, etc., etc. See you guys. Bye-bye.